I
Seemed like
get
you might
crazy. I get crazy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You don't want to set me off.
Every day I drop a new video diving into the untold stories behind Hollywood's golden age legends. If you love this kind of drama-filled content, hit subscribe, drop a like, or leave a comment. It means the world to me and costs nothing. Now let's get into this shocking story. Rob Reiner, the brilliant filmmaker and actor who gave us decades of unforgettable movies, tragically lost his life in 2025. And the details behind his final days are absolutely heartbreaking. The legendary director and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, were found dead in the one place they should have felt safest, their own home. What makes it worse? The person responsible was someone from inside their circle, someone who knew them deeply. Rob Reiner had spent a lifetime telling stories about love, family, and human connection. But behind the scenes, his own family was falling apart. His son, Nick Reiner, had battled addiction in public for years, and that pain had already strained their family bond. But absolutely nothing could have prepared anyone for the fiery confrontation that exploded the night before everything went terribly wrong. Now investigators are taking another hard look at past interviews and old comments Nick once made about his father. Remarks that in hindsight might have been warning signs. It's chilling to think the clues were sitting there all along. The heartbreaking final night of Rob and Michelle's lives happened on December 13th, 2025. That evening, they were all smiles as they attended a Christmas party hosted by none other than Conan O'Brien. The room was packed with friends, industry insiders, and familiar faces. Everything seemed lighthearted at first, but people later recalled that something felt off. Then it happened. A loud argument broke out between Rob and his son Nick right there in front of everyone. This wasn't some quiet father-son disagreement. It was explosive. Guests could hear their raised voices echoing across the room, and tension filled the air like static. Several witnesses later described Nick's behavior as erratic and unsettling, saying it was impossible not to notice. The night that began in laughter ended in whispers, and what came next would shock Hollywood to its core. The morning after that chaotic Christmas party, one shaken guest told investigators that Nick had been freaking everyone out. That phrase quickly spread as detectives began connecting the dots about what really went down in those tense hours before the tragedy. According to witnesses, Rob Reiner didn't back away from the confrontation. He faced it head on. He tried to calm things down, to take control of the chaos instead of letting it explode further. Michelle never left his side for a second. The two of them stood together through it all, moving in sync like partners who had each other's backs no matter what. Soon after, Rob and Michelle decided to leave the party together, and people there said it looked completely intentional. They weren't storming out in anger. They were acting like parents trying to de-escalate the situation, trying to protect their son, to keep things from turning into a public scene. Some guests later described the moment as heartbreaking, watching two parents still trying to help their struggling child while the tension was clearly boiling underneath. Later that same night, Rob picked up the phone and had a casual chat with his longtime friend, Eric Idle. The two talked about work, especially their exciting plans for Spinal Tap 2. Eric later told investigators that nothing about Rob's tone hinted at stress, fear, or urgency. Rob sounded upbeat, focused, and completely engaged in what was ahead, like a man looking forward to the future, not one haunted by fear. But here's the part that chills everyone even now.
We didn't ever argue like quite like that. I mean, we did, I guess, to a degree, but it was never...
Before that night, Rob had quietly confided in close friends about something deeply personal. He told them, "I'm afraid of my son." That single confession, once brushed aside, would later echo with heartbreaking weight. When Rob said he was afraid of his son, it wasn't some offhand comment. It came from a place of real fear and heartbreak. It wasn't anger talking, it was worry. The kind of deep concern only a parent feels when they realize something is spiraling out of their control. Sadly, what unfolded next inside the Reiner home showed just how real that fear truly was. In the early hours of December 14th, 2025, tragedy struck. Rob and Michelle Reiner were killed inside their quiet Brentwood home. The same home that had once been a symbol of warmth, family, and Hollywood history. The Los Angeles District Attorney later confirmed that the deaths happened before sunrise, though the exact moment couldn't be pinned down. Still, investigators were sure it all unfolded in those dark, early hours when the world was still asleep. By around 3 p.m. that afternoon, their daughter, Rob Reiner, who lived right across the street, grew worried after not hearing from her parents all day. She decided to check on them, probably thinking it was just a normal visit, but when she walked inside, her world shattered. She found both of her parents unresponsive, and in pure panic, she dialed 911 right away. Paramedics and LAPD officers rushed to the scene within minutes, but it was already too late. Rob and Michelle were pronounced dead inside their home. The house was quickly sealed off, and detectives launched a full-scale homicide investigation that stunned Hollywood overnight. What made things even more mysterious was what they didn't find. There were no signs of forced entry, and no broken locks, no shattered windows, no alarms going off. Everything looked perfectly intact from the outside, which left only one chilling conclusion. Whoever did this either had access to the house or was let in willingly. Neighbors told police they hadn't heard a single scream, no loud noises, nothing out of the ordinary that night. It was as if the horror had unfolded in complete silence, hidden behind closed doors, while the rest of the neighborhood slept peacefully. In a quiet Brentwood neighborhood where even a dog barking can echo down the street, the silence that night was eerie. Houses in the area were equipped with top-tier security systems, so the complete lack of noise or alarms instantly raised red flags for investigators. Whoever moved through that house did so with precision, like someone who knew every corner, every creaky floorboard, every shadow. The absence of chaos wasn't random, it screamed familiarity. Detectives started piecing together the movements inside the home, and soon all eyes turned toward one person, Nick Reiner. According to the investigation, Nick slipped out of the house shortly after the killings, sometime around 4 a.m. on December 14th. From there, he made his way to the Pierside Hotel, checking in quietly while the rest of Los Angeles was still asleep. Hotel staff later told police that Nick didn't appear nervous or frantic at all. He was calm, polite, and completely composed. Nothing in his demeanor hinted at panic or guilt. He checked in like it was any normal night, exchanged a few words with the clerk, and went up to his room. But that calm image shattered fast once investigators got inside. When police examined the hotel room after Nick checked out, they discovered something chilling, traces of blood inside the room that directly connected him to the Brentwood crime scene. That single discovery tied his hotel stay to the tragedy, locking him into the timeline of the horrific events. Nick's stay at the hotel didn't last long. He was gone within hours, moving fast and leaving behind more questions than answers. Later that same day, surveillance cameras caught him at a gas station near Exposition Boulevard and Vermont Avenue. The footage showed him walking in casually, grabbing a drink, paying at the counter, and leaving as if nothing had happened at all. The calmness on that tape sent a shiver down investigators' spines. Surveillance footage showed Nick moving calmly, not rushing, not stumbling, just acting like nothing was wrong. That normal behavior stood in chilling contrast to what investigators believed had already taken place by then. By the evening of December 14th, detectives had locked in on his location, and around 9:15 p.m., they closed in near Exposition Park, just steps from the University of Southern California. Multiple patrol cars swarmed the busy intersection, lights flashing and sirens slicing through the night. Witnesses later said it looked like a movie scene. Police everywhere, engines revving, people watching in shock. Despite the chaos, Nick didn't fight back. He followed every command, calm and compliant, and was taken into custody without any resistance. The silence of his surrender only made the situation more haunting. By the end of that long day, the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to connect. A heated argument at a Hollywood party, a quiet house in Brentwood, no signs of forced entry, a fast exit, and a trail that stretched across Los Angeles. But still, one burning question remained. What exactly happened inside that home? The most chilling details hadn't even surfaced yet. When investigators began piecing together the evidence and the bodies, the crime scene, and the timeline, The forensic results would shake everything they thought they knew about the case. Once police locked down the Reiner home, forensic teams moved in to uncover the truth hidden within those walls. Their first mission was the most crucial one, determining exactly when Rob and Michelle Reiner died and how.
I get crazy. I get crazy.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You don't want to set me off.
No, some big blow-ups there.
No, we both can get pretty...
You don't roll easily either.
No, we can both get pretty hot, and there were times when we did get hot.
Without surveillance cameras inside the home and no witnesses to the actual moment, the investigators had to rely on the science. The medical examiner began with a time of death analysis, searching for even the smallest clue that could tell them when that peaceful home turned into a scene of unthinkable tragedy. Forensic investigators had to rely on the only witnesses left, the physical evidence written on the victims' bodies. Two key clues guided their analysis: rigor mortis and lividity. Rigor mortis is when the muscles stiffen after death, and lividity shows how blood settles once the heart stops beating. Together, these signs help experts estimate how long someone has been gone, a silent clock ticking inside the human body. After carefully studying both, the medical examiner reached a chilling conclusion. Rob and Michelle Reiner likely died in the early morning hours, roughly 12 hours before their daughter made that heartbreaking discovery. This timeline fit perfectly with what investigators had already suspected. The attack had unfolded in the dead of night, while the entire neighborhood was asleep, unaware of the horror happening just a few doors away. Once the timeline was set, investigators turned their focus to the injuries, and what they found painted a horrifying picture. Both Rob and Michelle suffered multiple sharp force injuries, a clinical term for wounds caused by a knife or a similar weapon. These weren't distant strikes, they were up close, personal, and brutal. There was no sign of the attacker standing away or acting in haste. This was face-to-face violence, requiring direct contact and terrifying persistence. What truly stunned detectives wasn't just the type of wounds, but the sheer number of them. The repeated blows showed this wasn't a quick act of rage. It was something that dragged on, fueled by intense emotion and chaos. Each strike seemed to tell a story of anger spiraling completely out of control, leaving investigators to wonder what exactly could have triggered such a devastating explosion inside the Reiner home. This wasn't one quick strike followed by retreat. It was a sustained attack that unfolded over moments, even if those moments were brief. Forensic experts could tell from the repeated wounds that this wasn't some impulsive act that ended as quickly as it began. It showed continuation, movement, focus, and intent. From a legal standpoint, that kind of sustained action often signals one thing: the attacker made a conscious choice to keep going instead of stopping. Investigators didn't try to interpret emotion, but prosecutors saw what they needed to see. Based on the forensic evidence, Nick Reiner was officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for each of his parents. That charge represents the most serious homicide offense possible under California law, reserved for cases where intent and sometimes premeditation are clear. But the prosecution didn't stop there. They went even further. Because the case involved multiple victims, special circumstances were added to the charges. Under California law, that moves a murder case into the highest legal category imaginable. This isn't just legal jargon. It changes everything. Once special circumstances are attached, the potential punishment shifts to the harshest sentences available. No second chances, no early release, no leniency. If convicted, Nick Reiner now faces either life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty itself. The Los Angeles District Attorney made sure the public understood just how serious this was. The DA's statement was firm, confident, and final. The evidence lined up, the timeline fit, and the forensic details were solid enough to pursue the most severe charges their office could bring. This announcement rocked Hollywood and the nation. The son of one of film's most beloved figures now standing accused of the unthinkable. By this stage, investigators had finally locked down the facts, a solid timeline, a clear cause of death, and undeniable proof of close-range sustained violence. Add to that the eerie lack of forced entry and the movement trail Nick left behind, and the case was airtight. All that was left now was to bring those findings into the courtroom, and that's when the next shock hit. When Nick Reiner faced a judge for the very first time, every single detail of that courtroom scene sent waves through both the public and the press. The atmosphere, the security, even what he was wearing. Everything screamed that this was no ordinary hearing. It all went down on the morning of December 17th, 2025, inside a Los Angeles courtroom packed with tension. Up until that day, everything the public knew came from police briefings, official documents, and scattered statements. But this was different. This was the moment the case officially crossed from investigation to trial, and every word spoken inside those walls would become part of the permanent record. The courtroom was locked down tighter than a movie set under secrecy. No cameras, no live feeds, no broadcast crews. Not a single lens was allowed inside. Only a handful of reporters got access, seated quietly alongside court staff, lawyers, and security. The restrictions were set long before Nick arrived and stayed in force through the entire proceeding. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Nick Reiner's entrance. He was brought in under heavy escort, flanked by deputies who guided him straight to the defense table. The room went silent as he walked in. No shouting, no outbursts, just a thick, uneasy stillness. The sight of the once promising filmmaker's son sitting there in a courtroom, accused of murdering his parents, left everyone in attendance stunned. When Nick Reiner entered the courtroom, everyone immediately noticed what he was wearing. A harm prevention smock, the kind issued to inmates under strict monitoring in serious criminal cases. The sight of it sent a wave of unease through the room. The smock was clearly visible, but no one, not even the judge, made a single comment about it. No explanation, no clarification. The court simply moved forward as if it wasn't there, but the tension it created hung thick in the air. Once the judge called the courtroom to order, the charges were read out loud, and hearing them spoken in full made the entire case feel even heavier. Nick Reiner was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for his father, Rob Reiner, and one for his mother, Michelle Singer Reiner. The charges were read in calm, precise legal language, but the meaning behind those words was devastating. When the judge asked Nick if he understood his rights, the room fell silent. He barely spoke, just a short confirmation that he did. That single acknowledgement was the only time he uttered a word during the entire hearing. He didn't enter a plea, didn't ask questions, didn't react. He simply sat there, eyes forward, listening as the weight of the accusations filled the room. After the charges were officially recorded, the court moved on to scheduling. Nick's defense attorney requested a delay for the arraignment, asking for more time to prepare. The judge agreed, setting a new court date for January 7th, 2026. The day Nick would finally be required to enter a plea. The prosecution didn't object, and the hearing wrapped up quickly after that. But even as the session ended, the image of Nick sitting there in that unmistakable smock, and silent, motionless, and expressionless, lingered with everyone who witnessed it. It was only after the hearing began to wind down that people in the courtroom truly noticed who was standing next to Nick Reiner, his defense attorney, Alan Jackson. The moment his name hit the courtroom record, whispers rippled through the crowd. Jackson isn't just any lawyer. His name carries serious weight in the legal world. He's a high-powered defense attorney with a long track record of handling cases that dominate headlines and drag on for months, even years. Jackson has represented some of the most controversial figures in recent history. Clients like Kevin Spacey, Harvey Weinstein, and Karen Reed. His presence alone changed the entire tone of the case.
I just replay what's happened every single time when I decide to give into that voice, and it's never been good. So it's just like, if I look at it from like a mathematical standpoint, the statistics are like 0 for it going well.
This wasn't some temporary defense or public defender stepping in last minute. This was a power move, a clear signal that Nick's team was gearing up for a long, complex, and fiercely fought legal battle. The choice of Jackson made one thing clear. The defense wasn't planning to fold. They were preparing to challenge every piece of evidence, every timeline, and every claim the prosecution brought forward. Court insiders knew this meant months, maybe even years, of hearings, filings, and expert testimony ahead. As the hearing came to a close, Nick was quietly escorted out the same way he'd entered, flanked by deputies saying nothing. Neither side addressed the media. The prosecution stayed silent, and Jackson declined to comment. Within minutes, the courtroom emptied as quickly as it had filled. But outside those doors, the buzz was just beginning. Within hours, the focus shifted from what happened in court to a new and burning question. Who was paying for Nick's defense? Legal analysts pointed out that a double first-degree murder case, especially one carrying special circumstances, can drag on for years and rack up astronomical costs. With forensic experts, private investigators, and long pretrial motions ahead, this was shaping up to be one of the most expensive and most watched trials in Hollywood history. Legal experts quickly began crunching numbers, and the figures were staggering. Defending a case of this size and complexity could easily top $1 million before the trial even begins. That raised eyebrows immediately because Nick Reiner didn't appear to have any steady income or a career that could possibly support that kind of expense. The question on everyone's mind was the same. Who's paying for this defense? Speculation started swirling almost instantly. Some insiders whispered that the funds might be coming from the Reiner family estate, a fortune built over decades of Hollywood success. Others questioned whether it was even legal to use those assets for a defense tied to the very tragedy that ended the Reiners' lives. Estate lawyers jumped into the conversation, explaining that the situation is complicated. In some cases, shared or inherited assets can cover legal fees, but in others, doing so can spark bitter disputes or even lawsuits from other family members. None of these financial questions came up in court. The judge didn't ask, and the defense didn't offer a single detail about where the money was coming from. But the silence only fueled the fire. The public conversation exploded online and across talk shows. Opinions quickly split into two camps. Some argued that everyone deserves access to quality legal defense, no matter what the charges are. Others found it unsettling to think that family-linked funds, possibly the same estate left behind by Rob and Michelle, might be used to defend the person accused of their deaths. The ethical line suddenly looked blurred, and emotions were running high. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, things within the Reiner family seemed just as tense. Reports began circulating that some relatives were torn, hoping that Nick would receive serious psychiatric treatment, even as he faced the full weight of criminal prosecution. The courtroom may have been procedural, but outside, the storm around this case was only getting louder. Those family reports about treatment and internal disputes were never officially confirmed. No court filings, no public statements, nothing concrete. From the prosecution's side, though, there was zero hesitation. Their stance stayed firm and unshakable. Prosecutors insisted that the evidence clearly supported first-degree murder charges. They pointed straight to the brutality of the attack and to Nick's movements after his parents' deaths as proof that this wasn't an act of panic. It was intentional. According to them, every element lined up perfectly with the legal definition of premeditated murder. And because the case carried special circumstances involving multiple victims, the stakes couldn't be higher. Those added conditions locked the sentencing options into only the harshest possible outcomes. If convicted, Nick Reiner wouldn't face any middle ground. It would be life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. There was no leniency on the table, no reduced sentence, no alternate route. Outside the courtroom, the investigation kept moving full speed ahead. Detectives were still digging. Attorneys on both sides were building strategies, and private discussions about evidence and testimony swirled quietly behind closed doors. Even as the public waited for updates, insiders knew the case was still evolving beneath the surface. But while the courtroom had remained eerily quiet, something was shifting, and fast. Whispers began spreading that Nick Reiner himself had something to say. In the days that followed, attention suddenly turned toward a statement Nick had made earlier, one that no one had paid close attention to before. Once it resurfaced, it would completely reshape how the world saw this case, leading to what became known as Nick's shocking revelation. At one point, Nick Reiner opened up about his childhood. And what he said now feels haunting. He admitted that he never truly bonded with his father growing up. and that distance shaped everything about how he saw himself within the family. Nick described feeling like an outsider in his own home, always on the sidelines, watching everyone else connect while he couldn't find a way in. Rob Reiner, despite being a loving and hands-on father, had strong bonds with his other kids, shared interests like sports, film, and family routines that kept them close. But for Nick, those same spaces never felt like his. The Reiner household looked stable and supportive from the outside, but inside, Nick quietly felt like he was living next to his family, not with them. Rob wasn't absent. Far from it. He was present, accomplished, and deeply proud of his family. But fame, constant work, and success can build invisible walls without anyone realizing it. Nick grew up surrounded by privilege and love, yet struggled to feel truly seen. While his father balanced studios, scripts, and set life, Nick was fighting to figure out where he belonged. And that growing disconnect started to take its toll. As Nick's loneliness deepened, he began pulling away, searching for something to fill the emptiness he couldn't quite name. Without that steady bond to anchor him, he started finding comfort in the wrong places, drifting toward crowds and scenes that offered escape instead of guidance. That's when he first turned to illegal substances, experimenting at a young age. What began as curiosity quickly spiraled into dependency. By just 15 years old, Nick's addiction had become so severe that he was sent to rehab. Not once, but multiple times. The family fought hard to help him, with treatment sought early and urgently. The substances involved weren't mild. They were dangerously addictive and carried serious long-term consequences. Nick himself later admitted the truth about his use and the deep dependency that followed him into adulthood. His struggle wasn't hidden. It was raw, public, and painful, setting the stage for the battles that would shadow the rest of his life. Nick's addiction fell into a heartbreaking pattern that countless families battling substance abuse know too well. Short bursts of recovery followed by crushing relapses. Every time things seemed to improve, another setback hit hard, throwing his life into chaos again. During those dark periods, Nick's world became unstable. He drifted from place to place, spending time in Maine, New Jersey, and Texas, often without steady housing or direction. These weren't career moves or adventures. They were survival stretches where routine and structure completely vanished. But through all that turmoil, Rob and Michelle Reiner never gave up on their son. They didn't walk away or hide from the situation. They faced it head on, openly acknowledging Nick's struggles in interviews and continuing to take responsibility as parents. Over the years, they poured their hearts and resources into helping him, funding countless rehab programs, covering treatment costs, and staying emotionally present even when the progress didn't last.
You know, we did get into fights over things, but ultimately it forced us to...
Friends close to the family later described a pattern of relentless support, constant phone calls, encouragement, and second chances that never seemed to stop. Every time Nick stumbled, his parents were there, hoping that this time things would finally turn around. At one point, Rob decided to take a new approach. Instead of keeping his son's struggles separate from his career, he invited Nick into his creative world. In 2015, father and son teamed up on the deeply personal film Being Charlie, a project inspired directly by Nick's battle with addiction and recovery. The movie didn't sugarcoat anything. It showed the brutal cycle of relapse and the painful climb toward healing. It wasn't about a miracle cure. It was about the daily fight to stay clean and the emotional wreckage that addiction leaves behind. During that time, Nick seemed to find a bit of balance again. Working alongside his father, he showed signs of stability, consistency, and renewed purpose. A glimpse of hope that maybe, just maybe, things were finally turning around. For a brief moment, it like Nick Reiner had finally found his footing. Working alongside his father gave him something he hadn't had in years, structure and purpose. Those close to the family said the difference was noticeable. The constant chaos that once surrounded Nick seemed to fade, replaced by focus, consistency, and genuine connection. It was the kind of calm Rob and Michelle had been praying for. But heartbreakingly, that peace didn't last long. Soon after, Nick relapsed, and everything he'd built came crashing down again. The progress unraveled almost overnight, and the old patterns came roaring back. Instability, isolation, and unpredictable behavior. Each relapse didn't just break Nick down further. It tore at the emotional fabric of the entire family. As the years went on, and the relapses became more frequent, the sense of concern inside the Reiner family grew heavier. The cycle was spinning faster, the consequences sharper, and what once seemed manageable through rehab or intervention began to feel dangerously volatile. Rob and Michelle never stopped showing up for their son. Their love was unwavering. But love can't cancel fear, and according to those close to them, that fear was growing. They weren't just worried about Nick's recovery anymore. They were starting to worry about their own safety. Nick's earlier admission that he had never truly bonded with his father started to resurface in painful new ways. It wasn't seen as an excuse, but as a glimpse into a deeply complicated relationship marked by love, guilt, disappointment, and endless attempts to repair what addiction had broken. By the time of that ill-fated Christmas party, the tension between father and son wasn't new. It had been simmering for years. The argument that night wasn't random. It was the eruption of long-standing wounds, built up through cycles of relapse, reconciliation, and lingering distance. For the Reiners, addiction hadn't just shaped Nick's life. It had reshaped the entire family, influencing every decision, every boundary, and ultimately every tragedy that followed. As Nick grew older, that same feeling of disconnection he'd spoken about from childhood didn't fade. It only deepened. It carried over into adulthood, colliding with years of substance use, instability, and endless cycles of recovery and relapse. That painful pattern stayed locked in place right up until the tragedy that tore the family apart. In the days immediately following the heartbreaking deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner, the world waited to hear from the rest of the family. And soon a statement came from their surviving children, Romy Reiner and Jake Reiner. Their joint message hit like a wave of sorrow, offering the first public glimpse into how the family was coping with unimaginable loss. They didn't try to explain what happened or address the swirling legal questions. Instead, their words focused entirely on grief and heartbreak. They described the loss as devastating, expressing the deep pain and disbelief that had consumed them since that night. Rather than portraying Rob and Michelle as Hollywood icons, Romy and Jake spoke from the heart, emphasizing who their parents were to them, loving, grounded, and the emotional anchors of their family. Their statement made something very clear. This wasn't just a public tragedy playing out in the media. It was a private nightmare unfolding inside a shattered family trying to make sense of the unthinkable. Alongside that painful acknowledgement, Romy and Jake expressed gratitude for the overwhelming wave of support pouring in from every corner of the country and even from around the world. Friends, colleagues, fans, and complete strangers had reached out with condolences, memories, and messages of love. The siblings thanked everyone for their kindness, but also asked for privacy. A small bit of space to grieve, heal, and prepare for the difficult road ahead. Since that moment, they've stayed completely silent. No interviews, no appearances, and no public clarifications. Their quiet speaks volumes, showing just how deep the pain runs and how personal this loss truly is. After the tragedy, the Reiner family completely stepped back from the public eye, choosing to grieve privately while letting the legal process unfold on its own. Away from the media frenzy, they quietly organized a private memorial for Rob and Michelle. A deeply intimate gathering meant only for those who had truly known and loved them. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no press statements, just close family, lifelong friends, and a few of Rob's most trusted collaborators from across his decades-long career. Attendees later described the memorial as simple, heartfelt, and deeply personal. It wasn't about awards, premieres, or Hollywood glitz. It was about connection, memory, and love. People who had shared real-life moments with Rob and Michelle came together to honor them in silence, far from headlines and speculation. Meanwhile, across Hollywood, the shockwaves continued to ripple. Tributes poured in from actors, directors, and writers whose lives had been touched by Rob Reiner's extraordinary talent and kindness. Kathy Bates, who had worked with him early in her career, spoke with emotion about his warmth as a director. someone who always made his actors feel seen and valued. Kate Hudson credited him as a creative influence whose impact stretched across generations of performers. Actor Nick Robinson, who collaborated with Reiner later in his career, remembered his patience and generosity on set, saying that Rob had a rare ability to make people feel safe enough to take risks and deliver their best work. Though every tribute had its own tone, they all carried the same message. Rob Reiner was steady, respectful, and genuine. He wasn't just a director, he was a mentor and a builder of creative trust. Colleagues described how effortlessly he moved between genres, from heartfelt dramas to timeless comedies, always keeping his unique voice intact. As Hollywood reflected on his legacy, the focus naturally shifted back to his remarkable body of work. Rob didn't rely on spectacle or flash. He told stories that captured real human emotion. The Princess Bride still stands as a cultural gem, a perfect mix of humor, sincerity, and fantasy that never loses its heart. And Stand By Me continues to be hailed as one of the most honest, emotional portrayals of childhood and loss ever put on screen. Even in tragedy, Rob Reiner's influence echoed through every corner of the industry, a lasting reminder of how deeply his storytelling had touched generations. When Harry Met Sally hit theaters, it didn't just entertain audiences, it was the entire romantic comedy genre. Instead of relying on overused cliches, it built romance out of real, honest conversation and human connection. Rob Reiner had a gift for finding truth in simplicity, for proving that deep emotion didn't need special effects or spectacle to feel powerful. Those who worked with him said his legacy wasn't built on the number of films he made, but on the consistency and care behind every single one. He was famous for showing up prepared, respecting his actors, and trusting his teams. His sets weren't about ego. They were about collaboration, storytelling, and people. And while Rob's name often dominated the spotlight, Michelle Singer Reiner's role was every bit as essential. She worked largely behind the scenes, dedicating herself to philanthropy, family, and causes close to her heart. Friends described her as the quiet force beside Rob, a true partner who helped him balance the weight of fame with the warmth of home. Together, they built a life grounded in loyalty, love, and shared purpose. As tributes continued to pour in, it became impossible to ignore the heartbreaking contrast between Rob's public legacy and the private tragedy surrounding his death. The same industry that celebrated his brilliance was now forced to watch as a devastating legal case unfolded, one that struck at the very core of the Reiner family. For those closest to them, there was no dividing line between public remembrance and private grief. Professional praise and courtroom headlines coexisted side by side, creating a surreal overlap of sorrow and spotlight. Yet through it all, one truth remained clear. Behind the headlines stood two real people, loving parents, devoted partners, and lifelong friends whose absence left a hole that Hollywood could never fill. As the legal process moves forward and the tributes keep coming, one message echoes louder than ever. Rob and Michelle Reiner were more than the tragedy that ended their story. They were a legacy of love, creativity, and connection that will live on far beyond the noise of cameras and courtrooms. So what do you think? Do you believe Nick Reiner truly committed these crimes, or could there be more to the story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this deep dive moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and click the next video on your screen for more Hollywood stories that will leave you speechless.